I hate to spook anybody, but this is my favorite number. Play your ass off, boy. Come on!
Hello out there in podcast land. My name is Ian Clarke. You are listening to the Ferris Classic Rock Show, sliding into evening here, which is perfect for what we're going to talk about, which is Jim Morrison, entitled People Are Strange and Greedy, The Weird Death and Afterlife of Jim Morrison. Okay, let's go. Jim Morrison, who checked out in July of 1971, so he's been dead about twice as long as he was alive. Put in perspective, doesn't it? It doesn't seem like it, given the unending popularity of the Doors. You'd think they're still touring. Rarely has a band been so well promoted following its demise. Of course, the master salesman of it all, the ringleader, was Ray Manzarek, the band's late great keyboard player. Manzarek didn't miss a note, from promoting the possibility that Jim faked his own death to packaging the Doors materials ad nauseum in reissues and remixes and film and video. But the Doors, bottom line, was a great band, one of the greatest. They wrote and performed songs that sounded like no one else before or since, and that's an incredible accomplishment, so I'll repeat it. They wrote and performed songs that sounded like no one else before or since. Totally original. Most bands, like 98%, sound like other bands, especially today. Now, a significant percentage of the Doors' enduring popularity has to do with Jim Morrison. The hagiography is bolstered by romanticism. He hits all the green lights. Number 1, he was handsome and died young. Number 2, he was a talented alcoholic poet who died young. Number 3, he died under somewhat mysterious circumstances. I'll get to that later, promoting the notion that he faked his own death. Finally, number 4, Morrison's lyrics are haunted by intimations of death, casting a gothic ambience over this lyricist who died young. Okay, in death, Morrison has a lot going for him. In 1981, Morrison, not the Doors, made the cover of Rolling Stone magazine with the tagline, "He's hot, he's sexy, and he's dead." So even before social media lifted the Doors into the electronic stratosphere, the band enjoyed a unique, odd, post-mortem renaissance, receiving a huge lift with the biography No One Here Gets Out Alive, 1980, and the Oliver Stone film, The Doors, from 1991. Their fame has astral projected beyond the music. The Doors belong in that rarefied ether of the great concert in the sky that is home to the classic rock immortals. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, the Beatles, Stones, Zeppelin. The point is this: Hotel California style, you can check in, but you can never leave. And it's because of this strange fame, all aspects of the Doors have been put under a microscope to be examined, cataloged, discussed, interpreted, debated, and translated. Each person, each musical group for that matter, each company, and even each country is grounded by 2 temporal bookends, birth date and death date. We know the Doors were born on that beach in Venice, California, in 1965. And we know when realistically they died, when Jim Morrison died in July of 71 in Paris. And yes, I'm aware of the 3 post-Morrison albums released in the 1970s. I even reviewed the last one on release. But please, no Jim Morrison, no Doors. We know that. It's reasonable to expect the death date of the Doors to receive the micro treatment, and it has. The most popular version of Jim Morrison's death is that he died of a heroin overdose in an apartment in Paris. Morrison and his common law wife, and I use that term common law again because it comes into play very shortly. His common law wife, Pam Courson, rented an apartment at 17 Rue Beautreles. In the early morning of July 3rd, 1971, he was found dead in the bathroom of that apartment. Courson called the authorities, but they arrived way too late to revive him. He'd been dead for hours. He was declared dead of heart failure brought on by drug abuse. Okay, since then we know that's not quite how it unfolded, but close enough. Details have been added in the thesis level study of the narrative. With that along, we know that it's doubtful Courson first called the so-called authorities. Rather, she called a French-speaking friend of Morrison's and asked him what to do. We also have a pretty good idea that the heroin Morrison snorted that evening was supplied, indirectly perhaps, by the Count Jean de Broutil, a really dreadful man who also supplied drugs to other rock stars, some of whom died. For more on this lovely character, visit 60spop.blogspot.com. That's the number 6 and 0 plus an S, 60s. Or read Tony Sanchez's great book, Up and Down with the Rolling Stones. The Count makes a vampiric-like appearance in that one, too. So, this particular batch of heroin was more powerful than expected, and Morrison, possibly thinking he was snorting cocaine, pulled it all into his asthmatic lungs. And it went right to his heart, already damaged by a childhood bout of rheumatic fever. And that's what it was, that big sleep that he'd long yearned for. The other version of his death that's really come out in the last 10 years is that he overdosed in a Paris nightclub. The nightclub, which understandably did not want the ensuing problems of an on-location celebrity drug death, had the possibly still alive Morrison removed to his own apartment. His haphazard attendants / bouncers placed him in a warm bath, which supposedly helps heroin junkies. Better than what happened to Graham Parsons, by the way, the Joshua tree. But that's another podcast. In either case, the death was due to drugs, battering an already compromised body, and the official cause was heart attack. There was no autopsy because the examining doctor had little trouble determining the cause of death. No mystery, no conspiracy. A lot is made of the fact that Morrison was prepared for burial without any of his close friends present, notably the band's manager, but his body had been identified by Courson and Alain Ronet, the French-speaking friend. And they rushed the funeral because they didn't want attendant publicity. He was buried 4 days after his death. That's it. You can watch a French documentary, by the way, on YouTube, where one of the ambulance attendants who came to the apartment that evening is interviewed. He doesn't dispute the notion that it was Morrison they laid out on the bed. Now, lots of celebrities have died young. This particular podcast today, episode called The 27 Club. And 27 Club has many members, but no one wants to speak much about Brian Jones anymore. They don't go on about Sam Cooke or Otis Redding, or even the mists of time have fogged cultural references to Amy Winehouse. So why the Doors after 50 years? There's a bunch of reasons. And I subtitled this episode, The Weird Death and Afterlife of Jim Morrison. Thinking about it, it's kind of a junk title because both subjects are only weird due to willful commercial interpretations. More accurately, it should be called The Sad Death and Commercial Afterlife of Jim Morrison. What's rarely mentioned by Doors fans, either because they don't know or, willingly suspend belief, is that by the time Jim Morrison flew off to Paris, he had left the band. Not officially as per, Paul McCartney-style press release, but he left the band. But subsequent interviews with the Doors staff make it clear that he was looking for a new gig. Wanted to be a poet, wanted to be an author. He had his money, free as a bird. To that end, the other three Doors were in the studio, while Morrison was slumming around Paris with his common-law wife. Again, I mentioned that term because it plays a big role, later on. As a side note, Yoko Ono did not break up the Beatles and Pam Courson did not break up the Doors. However, they most definitely both were accelerants. So the question, would the Three Doors have released Other Voices, their first post-Jim album, if Morrison had officially quit the band? Let's look at it this way. Morrison died in July and that album was released in October. 3 months. The 3-month gap is self-incriminating. You would not want to walk into a court with that. Sure, they wanted Morrison to sing. He was their star, unpredictable, unreliable, infuriating. Read John Densmore's book. But he was their star. But if he choked, to hell with them. They were going to continue. Look what happened with Brian Jones and the Stones. These guys just keep rolling, and rightly so. They were a top band, but the pursuit was as suicidal as Morrison's drug intake. They released one more album after that and quit. A few years later, late 70s, they dug up some tapes of Morrison reading poetry and performed instrumental backgrounds over the readings. The album was called American Prayer, and it was a good album. Perhaps more of a novelty, but I thought it was pretty good. Okay, Morrison's dead. Now the true commercialization of the Doors begins. When he died, Jim Morrison was worth about $2.5 million US in today's currency. In 2014, his estate was valued at $80 million US. Boy, oh boy. Okay, he had a valid will, drafted 2 years before he died. In it, he left everything to Pam Courson, and if she failed to survive Morrison by 3 months, then his assets would pass to his brother, Andy and Anne, if I recall. Even though Courson did survive Morrison by more than 3 months, she barely got the inheritance. Pamela received no money from the estate for almost 2 years because she objected to approximately $75,000 in attorney's fees submitted by Morrison's longtime lawyer, Max Fink, for work he did on Morrison's Miami trial, along with other stuff. It was a standoff, and Pam went through, 4 other lawyers and finally gave in and agreed to pay. And due to that, she got about $150,000 cash, 1970, $3 or $4, one or the other, plus investments that Morrison had made in oil, which is a wonderful kind of a flip on the hippie ideals. He invested in oil. The first thing she did was buy a VW and a mink coat. Good for her. After Jim died, his estate was tied up in litigation in probate court. Dozens of women came forth with paternity claims. No kidding. To make it worse, Morrison's former Doors bandmates also sued, claiming a bigger share of the Doors royalties. They claimed that Morrison had borrowed from the Doors Corporation against future earnings. Quite possible. Courson received a modest stipend to live on during the probate proceedings, but it wasn't enough to support her. She was a heroin addict and possibly turned to prostitution to support her drug habit. Although, I think that's one of those kind of catty little invectives that's been thrown in over the years. There's really no substantial proof for that. But you'll read it everywhere when you read about the life of poor Pam. Then Courson died only 3 years after Morrison, also from a heroin overdose, and actually also at age 27. She joined the club. Because she died without a will, mistake, the Jim Morrison fortune passed on to her heirs under intestate law. That meant Courson's parents received the entire Morrison estate. See, it gets from funky to funkier, this whole thing. So Jim Morrison's parents found out about this, and they lit a fire, so to speak, and they litigated, alleging his common law marriage to Pamela was illegitimate. The court dismissed the argument. They didn't give up. They hung in there. Now, on the other side, Courson's parents not only had to prove that she was legally married to Morrison, they also had to defend against the will. Okay, the Doors singer's parents, retired admiral, claimed his will was invalid because he was not competent when he wrote it. They alleged he was under the influence of narcotics at the time. Boy, that's not going to work. In 1980, the Morrison War ended with an out-of-court settlement. They split everything 50-50, but the Corsons walked away with the all-important rights to manage and control Jim's image, music, and royalties. And what about Morrison's brother and sister, rather? They received nothing at this point. Mr. Corson reportedly disliked Jim Morrison, didn't approve of Pam's relationship with him, and even blamed Morrison for Corson's death. How's that for irony? And Morrison's parents were not exactly close to him before he died either. He used to tell people they were dead. Between 1991 and 2013, the Doors sold 17 million albums and 5 million downloads in the U.S. alone. Overall, the group has posted over 30 million album sales in the U.S. alone and 100 million sales worldwide. So this is a huge estate. After Pam's mother died, in 2014, as I recall, the last of the four parents to break on through to the other side, Pam's sister Judith inherited the money. Okay. You almost have to do notes on this to follow these, like one of those family trees. Now, Judith herself died in 2018. Boy, oh boy. However, the beneficiaries weighed it out. They were collectively entitled to a 25% split of the Doors' residual income stream, alongside Robbie Krieger, John Densmore, and Dorothy Manzarek, the late Ray Manzarek's wife. Now, based on a reported $3 million U.S. annual record and download sales, plus incidental publicity and memorabilia licensing, each quarter of the band may be worth about $750,000 a year. So, Pam Corson's sister's heirs, she had children, could get upwards of $375,000 US a year because of their deceased mother's long-dead sister's common-law husband. Such is life, folks. Such is life. They'll never have to work, and they'll live in splendor in beautiful Los Angeles. Okay, after Morrison died and the Doors broke up, the remaining Doors pursued individual projects, but you've never really heard of them unless they did something Doors-related. In 2002, Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger formed a new version of the Doors, which they called Doors of the 21st Century. Kind of a cool name. After legal battles over the Doors' name with drummer John Densmore, who filed an injunction against his former bandmates in 2003, they changed their name several times and ultimately toured with the name Manzarek Krieger, or Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger of the Doors. Yeah, that probably makes more sense. Save yourself a bit on that one. Okay. In 2008, Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger had to pay $5 million to drummer John Densmore and the parents of Jim Morrison and Pam Morrison, as the legal battle between the former band members finally reached its conclusion. John Densmore, who was kind of a flinty little character, he didn't object to the duo playing Doors music when they toured. He just asked that they not use the name, logo, or anything Morrison era, or any Morrison era imagery, rather, which the duo eventually did. Maybe he was on to something, but he didn't seem to mind too much before that time. Some people claim his bitterness was due to an affliction of tinnitus. He had trouble with live performances. Who knows? What about the songs? Back in 71, nobody predicted that the copyrights on the Doors song catalog would even be an issue 43 years after the rock star himself was dead. Under the then extant intellectual property law, Morrison's lyrics would have stopped accruing royalties in 1996. And the challenge of assigning that income stream beyond that point would be academic. However, unexpected extensions of the copyright period now mean that his literary estate remains active until 2041. And after that, the lawyers are going to get busy again. All right, here we go, folks. The big what-if questions. that you're going to find on Door's social media sites. Here we go. If Jim hadn't have died in Paris, would he have rejoined the band? Well, certainly the three surviving Doors always danced around the issue, especially after the band broke up. They knew the Morrison persona remained the group's chief moneymaker. It was better to give the impression that Morrison was just taking a break, which, to be fair, was possible, highly infinitesimally unlikely, but possible. Also, for decades, the late, great Ray Manzarek always hinted that Morrison might still be alive. In 2002, he wrote a book, fiction book, called Poet in Exile. Here's a description of the book from the LA Times. Quote, "Is the lead singer of America's most notorious rock and roll band really buried in Paris? Years after the poet's apparent death, his longtime musical collaborator and friend, Roy, receives the first of several mysterious postcards bearing the cryptic verse signed only J. Trusting his instinct that this is not a hoax, Roy traces the cards to their apparent source, a remote island in the Indian Ocean. There, to his amazement, he is reunited with a man once known as the Snake Man, and hears the remarkable story of his fake death and the rebirth it made possible. A happily married man, the father of 2 children, he has discovered the secret to life and is finally free of the demons that had driven him headlong through the American night. Now an enticing question arises. Would destiny smile upon the relaunch of one of the most influential rock bands in history? A narrative that ends with a moment of authentic surprise and heart-tugging poignancy. Oh, please, spare us. Manzarek had no shame. In April of this year, Robbie Krieger said that both he and drummer John Densmore were never happy with Manzarek playing the public with such a serious issue as Morrison's death, especially as his sister and brother are around. Krieger told Classic Rock magazine, quote, "Ray became kind of the spokesman of the Doors, and all the stuff he used to say about trying to make it like Jim wasn't dead and stuff. It was kind of creepy because he was obviously just doing it to try to keep the sales up or something. I think that's what John was thinking too. But after really talking about it with Ray, he just loved the Doors, and he didn't want people to forget. Maybe he went too far." Regarding the possibility that Manzarek actually believed that Jim Morrison was truly alive, Krieger said, quote, "That's pretty much bullshit. Yeah, he didn't have to do that, and I think that's really what got him and John in a bad way. It's true, those two had a bad falling out and wouldn't perform together." Okay, let's sum it up. If ever a rock star needed a better last will and testament, obviously it was Jim Morrison. The woman he wants to leave his money to gets to spend very little of it before dying of a heroin overdose. The money then goes to her parents, whom Morrison barely knew, plus they didn't exactly like him. Morrison made them millionaires. The other side went to his parents, whom he avoided for years. They became zillionaires. And as I said, you got to go down the family tree a bit, but in the end, his brother and sister got their cut of the moolah. And that's what he intended all along. If there's an overarching theme to Jim Morrison's Afterlife, it's this, folks. People are strange and greedy. This is the end, my friend. I'm Ian Clarke, and you've been listening to the Ferris Wheel Classic Rock Show.